Hello, good afternoon. My name is Dong-ho Jo, a professor of North Korean Studies at Ewha Women's University. I am very happy to have a chance to introduce you North Korea policy of the Republic of Korea. We have 1 hour, and I think my lecture will be about 40 minutes, and then we're going to have Q&A session. Okay, let me start my lecture. I like to start with experiences of German unification because North Korea policy, we live in a divided country. So North Korea policy of South Korea is de facto unification policy. So that's why I want to tell you some outcomes, some benefits of German unification. Economic development. The former East Germany, the eastern part of Germany, its economy has been growing very fast after unification. So, for instance, gross domestic product of the eastern part of Germany has increased by more than 3 times within 20 years. Now, people's living standard in the eastern part is almost similar to that of Western Germans. Of course, there exist some gaps in terms of, let's say, wage and incomes and so on. However, even in South Korea, we have income gaps between, let's say, Seoul and other areas. So it is the same everywhere in the world. So we need to consider productivity gap. So the fact that there exists a wage gap between the two parts of Germany does not necessarily mean that unification is a failure. Also, no more division cost. Because of unification, so-called division costs are no longer exist. For instance, before unification, former East Germany had about 170,000 soldiers and about 500,000 soldiers in the former West Germany. However, now it is only 180,000, very sharp decrease in number of soldiers. Also, healthcare has improved. Thanks to unification, the quality and health of medical care has improved sharply. For instance, life expectancy in the former East Germany, let's say, at the time of unification in 1990, the life expectancy of the former East Germany, for male, it is about 70 years. For female, it's about 77 years. However, now, for male, it has increased to almost 79 years, and for female, it is 83. Furthermore, there are many intangible benefits, let's say freedom. Let's say political freedom, freedom of choice of jobs, freedom of press, and so on and so forth, and also human rights. Even if we cannot convert those values into money, however, if we can, those values should be enormous, should be infinite. So those values are very, very big. Also, democracy, national power of unified Germany, and also German unification has contributed to the peace and prosperity of entire Europe. We Koreans have more issues. For instance, we have separated family issues. We have millions of separated families. However, only about 20,000 people were able to meet during 1985 to this year. In my case, my father was from the north. In fact, he had married while he was in the North. So he had his wife and 3 sons in the North. However, after the Korean War, he could not get back to his home. So he became, let's say, kind of single in the South. My mother, her husband was killed during the Korean War, and she had 1 little daughter. So some years later, somebody introduced them to each other and they married, and I was born. So I have my half brothers in the North, and I have half sister in the South. I have never seen my half brothers. And my father, his only dream was to see his family at least once in his life. However, unfortunately, it never happened. He died. So his sons in the North, I'm sure that they didn't know his father died. There are so many people like me in the South and in the North. So we should solve this problem as soon as possible. Without unification, we cannot solve this problem fundamentally. Also, we have fear of war. Technically speaking, we are still at war. We are living armistice state. Okay, technically speaking, we are in the middle of war. In fact, some years ago, there was a bombing by North Korea to Yeonpyeong Island, west coast side of South Korea. Also, Korean Navy ship was sank by torpedo attack by North Korea, and many young soldiers was killed. So we want unification. The president of the Republic of Korea, in her inauguration speech, he made an oath like this: I swear before the people that I will faithfully execute the duties of the president by observing the Constitution and blah, blah, blah. And then he says, pursuing the peaceful unification of the homeland. That means that it is a duty of the president of the Republic of Korea to pursue the unification of the Korean Peninsula. In fact, unification has been a long-standing dream to all Korean people. We did not want division at all. We are not responsible for division. It was just a result of international politics. After the Second World War, the world had divided into 2, Soviet bloc, Western bloc and Eastern bloc. Eastern bloc was led by, former Soviet Union, and Western bloc was led by United Nations. So because of, conflict and struggle between the 2 powers, Korean Peninsula was divided into 2, the North and South. So it is not our choice. We want unification. However, for us, unification is not a goal, but means to enhance the quality of lives of all Korean people living on this peninsula and to secure peace and prosperity of Northeast Asia and the world. Therefore, unification process is more important than the unification itself. Now, let me briefly introduce you the history of inter-Korean relations. June 1950, outbreak of the Korean War, and hundreds of thousands of people were killed, and millions of houses, factories, farms, and so on were destroyed. Huge damage to all Korean people. And after 3 years, there was a signing of armistice agreement. Since then, we are still living in armistice agreement state. July 1972, there was July 4th South-North joint statement. In the picture, the gentleman on the left is that time South Korean KCIA chief. Okay, he went secretly to Pyongyang of North Korea and met that time North Korean leader Kim Il-sung, a grandfather of current North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And also North Korean delegation came to the south and met that time South Korean President Park Chung-hee. And after several negotiations, we were able to produce joint statement. So that was the first statement between the two Koreas. And in that statement, both North and South Korea announced that we agreed to three guiding principles concerning Korean unification: independence, peace, and national unity. And in 1985, first reunion of separated family members. 1988, November, South Koreans were able to travel Mount Kumgang area in the north. The tour project was operated by Hyundai company of South Korea. Year 2000, there was a first summit between the two Koreas since the end of Korean War. The person on the left was Kim Jong-il, a father of current leader Kim Jong-un, and the person on the right was that time South Korean President Kim Dae-jung. It was for the first time summit. And 4 years later, Kaesong Industrial Complex began operation. That industrial complex is located in Kaesong in North Korea, and about more than 100 South Korean firms entered there and built their factories and they start production. And October 2007, there was summit between North Korean Kim Jong-il and that time South Korean President Roh Moo-hyun. March 2010, North Korean torpedo sank Cheonan Navy ship of South Korea, and 46 young soldiers were killed. And also, February 2016, the Kaesong Industrial Complex was totally closed because of North Korea's test firing ICBM. February 2018, North and South Korea marched together at the opening ceremony of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games. We joined the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games as one team. So that's why if you see the flag in the picture, it is not North Korean, it is not South Korean, but it is Korean Peninsula flag. When we join international games as one team, we used to use that Korean Peninsula flag. And April 2018, there was summit again, and it is first summit meeting for current leader Kim Jong-un and South Korean President Moon Jae-in. And two months later of that Inter-Korean summit, there was for the first time DPRK-US summit at Singapore. Last year, February, there was a second DPRK-US summit was held at Hanoi. However, it was a total collapse. And June this year, North Korea destroyed the Inter-Korean Joint Liaison Office in Kaesong. So since then, all inter-Korean exchanges and cooperation stopped. Now, North Korea policy of South Korea. After the Korean War, North Korea had been considered as only an enemy because we killed each other. So, it is understandable that North Korea was viewed as an enemy, only enemy. So any contact with North Korea had been illegal, totally illegal until 1988. For instance, the slogans concerning North Korea have changed. At first, in the 1950s and 60s, we used to say 멸공, which means destroy communists. And then in the 1970s, we say overcome communists. And then these days, oppose communists. In the late 1980s, the South Korean government sought to shift inter-Korean relations of distrust and conflict to one of trust and cooperation, in line with great changes following the collapse of the communist bloc and an end of the Cold War system. So, 1988, July 7th, that time South Korean President Roh Tae-woo announced so-called special declaration for national self-esteem, unification, and prosperity. The core message of this special declaration was that North Korea is not an enemy anymore, but it is a partner toward unification. So our perception of North Korea has totally changed since then. As follow-up measures, an institutional foundation for effective inter-Korean exchange and cooperation was laid within the legal framework of South Korea. And both North and South Korea were able to produce Inter-Korean Basic Agreement in 1991. The core message of that agreement were five. First, let's remove the state of the political and military confrontation and achieve national reconciliation. Second, we need to avoid armed aggression and hostilities and reduce tension and ensure peace on the Korean Peninsula. And third, joint efforts to achieve peaceful unification, not by war. And both Koreas expressed the desire to realize multifaceted exchanges and cooperation to advance common national interests and prosperity. Finally, both North and South Korea recognize that our relations, inter-Korean relations, are not a relationship between the states, but a special interim relationship stemming from the process towards unification. So since then, we consider trade with North Korea is intra-trade within one Korea. That means that we do not impose tariff on imported items from the North. It is, to promote inter-Korean trade. However, of course, there are ups and downs. As North Korea has continued to conduct missile and nuclear provocations since its withdrawal from the NPT in 1993, inter-Korean relations have repeated advance and retreat. On average, I would say that North Korea policy of South Korea has been dependent on the political character of the president of South Korea. That means that politically conservative South Korean governments prefer containment policy, while progressive government prefer engagement policy. The examples of conservative government are President Kim Yong-sam, Lee Myung-bak, and Park Geun-hye. And progressive presidents are Kim Dae-jung, Roh Moo-hyun, and current President Moon Jae-in. However, unification, as I had said earlier, unification is an ultimate goal of all Korean people and all Korean government. And every president of South Korea has to make in his or her inauguration oath the duty of unification. We only differ in the ways how to improve inter-Korean relations, how to encourage the changes of North Korea, how to induce North Korea to come out to the world and to be a responsible member of international society and to achieve unification. So it's a matter of preference of carrots or sticks. Finally, unification policy of the Republic of Korea. It is called National Community Unification Formula, or three-phased approach to unification. In the first phase, we would like to have reconciliation and cooperation between the two Koreas. And then, based on the first phase, we want to enter the second phase of the Korean Commonwealth. And the final phase, we will have a unified Korea, one nation, one state. This is final slide. And for your reference, let me briefly tell you about the unification policy of the Republic, DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is North Korea. North Korea has their own unification formula, which is called Democratic Confederal Republic of Korea. It is basically North and South Korea should establish a national unified government with equal participation from both sides on mutual tolerance of differences in ideologies and systems. So in sum, the difference is this. South Korea, according to South Korea's unification formula, we imagine the unified Korea of one nation, one state, one system, one government. On the contrary, North Korea imagine one nation, one state, however, two systems, socialist system in the north and capitalist system in the south, and two local governments in the north, in the south. Of course, we have one central government. However, basically, we have two governments. So this is the difference between the two Koreas in terms of unification formulas. Okay, thank you. Let me stop here. We have about half an hour, longer than expected. So I'm going to take your questions and comments. Well, there is a question from Temur Beck. The question is, could both Koreas have a federal government and their own different laws like in the US? Well, in fact, that idea is North Korean unification formula. That is basically, there is one federal government. However, there are some local governments, like in the US. So that is the unification formula by North Korea. However, South Korean government, we want only one government, one state, one government, one system. So that's the difference between North and South Korea. Well, what are the South Korea's plans in regards to fusion of power elites? How does it plan to deal with the government of DPRK when unification happens in the Korean Peninsula? Well, that is hard question, but very important. Where we have, we do not have any concrete plans in the cabinet of the government. However, our basic idea is that we have to engage all those Korean people, as many as possible, after our unification. However, very high-ranking North Korean officials, very high-ranking North Korean military people, for their cases, it is not easy for them to maintain their position. However, lower-ranking officials, we have to re-educate them, reorient them, and then we utilize them in the process of our unification. How much has the language evolved in both North and South Korea? Well, basically, we can communicate each other. We use the same language, even if we have some, let's say, kind of dialect. However, it is, we can easily communicate each other. One difference these days is that South Koreans are using foreign languages, especially English, very often. But in the North, they don't use American English words. So there is difference between the two Koreas these days. However, in terms of language, we don't have any problems to communicate each other. 조금 크게 해주실래요? 네. Well, this is a question by Maxine Kim. He asked, Professor, you have mentioned several times that Koreans want unification. Do we speak about all Koreans or a specific generation who still have relatives and families in the North? Does younger generation of those younger generations of Koreans still have the same feelings? Since the more time passes, the less connection people have with North Korea, both through bloodiness and ideologically. Well, absolutely right. For instance, we have annually, many institutions execute ask people's conception of unification. Then the result is that about 2/3 of South Korean people want unification. However, it is different among the generations. On average, old generations, they prefer unification, whatever cost it is. However, younger generations like 20s, 30s, they are less interested in unification. That is true. So at least I could say that more than half of Korean people want unification. Of course, it is different between the generations. it is the same in the North. When I visited North Korea some years ago, I have met North Korean young people, and I asked them, do you prefer unification? And they said that no. Okay, and North Korean young generations told me that their fathers and grandfathers, they always say unification. However, I don't, because I am less interested in unification. And frankly speaking, North Korea is less developed than South Korea. So I want unification later, some decades later. And, during while North Korea will develop more, and once North and South Korea become almost similar, only then we are able to talk about unification. That is younger generation of North Korea. And another question is that which approach, engagement or containment, has shown better performance and why? Well, as I told you, conservative governments had used containment policy, and progressive ones adopted engagement policy. Where, in my opinion, both in containment and engagement policy have failed, because the basic purpose of containment or engagement is to solve North Korean nuclear and missile problems. However, these two policies failed to produce any meaningful outcome. So in that sense, I cannot say that, which one is better. Okay. What is your idea about May 18, Gwangju? People in Korea believe presently that it was a pro-North Korea supported uprising, and the event still politically divides Koreans. What do you think about it? Well, this is very difficult question, and frankly speaking, it is very political. Where I personally believe that there is no connection with DPRK. Okay, it was South Korean President Park Chung-hee. He was a general, and he made a coup in 1961, and he had been a position of the president for 18 years. He is kind of dictator. Even if he had developed the South Korean economy so rapidly, it is a pros in his era. However, politically, he was a dictator, and he died. In fact, he was assassinated in 1979, and all South Korean people believed that now we will have a so-called spring, which means we will have full freedom. We will have full democracy. However, it wasn't. There was another army general. So there was a protest in Gwangju. So it is our own politics. Okay, so I don't think North Korea or any North Koreans or North Korean spies were behind the Gwangju incident. Another question is that it was mentioned earlier that international politics was a major player in what led to the division of the Korea. Why they favor reunification of the two Koreas? Well, frankly speaking, that is a problem or obstacles we Koreans have to overcome. Frankly speaking, I don't think China is going to support reunification of the two Koreas. What about Japan? Here, any Japanese friend here? Any Japanese or Chinese? Would you please raise your hand if you are Chinese? No? No Chinese? What about Russian? Okay. What do you think about Russian government? Do you think it will be supportive to the reunification of Korea? No? Why not? Well, maybe there is some, technical problem where I think. Okay, you can speak.
Yeah, because South Korea is the closest ally to the United States, and Russia would not prefer the United States ally by its borders. Like, maybe, it's my opinion.
I'm sorry. Would you tell again, because I couldn't hear your voice?
Can you hear me now?
Okay. Now, okay, fine. Go ahead.
That, South Korea is the closest ally to the United States, and South Korea has United States bases, military bases, and Russia would not prefer it to be by its borders. So North Korea is kind of a buffer state. Maybe that's one of the versions.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. So that is the reason why China and Russia is not likely. They are not likely support the reunification of the two Koreas. So anyhow, in the German case, there was, German how can I say, German diplomatic relations with among Germans and the other four major ones, UK, France, Russia, and what anyway, German unification was possible. One of several reasons was Germans have very good relations with other major actors to get support from neighboring countries. So that is what we have to do in our case. Another comment is that unification is the means of enhanced quality of life in Korea. What does it mean, enhance South Koreans' life in this content? 네, 정확히 무슨 뜻인지 이해를 못하겠는데 무슨 말이죠? Well, both North and South Korea will live in a divided country, which means that, for instance, economically speaking, South Korea cannot fully exercise our economic potential. We cannot fully enjoy economies of scale because we are divided, because we have smaller market than the markets we are going to have after unification. So we have very many natural resources in the north, but South Korea, we cannot utilize those natural resources. Well, many others, so-called division cost, where now in South Korea, young people, young men must serve as a soldier for about 2 years. If we have unification, we will have less amount of soldiers. Then we can utilize these young people for much more productive ones. So there are many benefits from unification. Next comment is that, do you think a structure like Hong Kong's one country, two systems could work upon unification of North and South Korea? Well, there is one option, definitely, I think. Well, some people prefer one people, one nation, one system at once. However, it may be unrealistic, okay? Because North Korea has developed their own system for 70 years, and South Koreans, we have our own for 70 years. We are very much different now. So suppose tomorrow we have a chance to be reunified, then it is very, very difficult to have one system overnight. So your suggestion may be a very realistic option. Okay, we have two systems for some years or for some decades, and then we have the 100% unification. Well, next question is that democracies often change leaders and shift their priorities based on who is in charge at that time. Authoritarian states are able to keep a consistent message as long as their leader survives. In this regard, does democracy help or hurt the ability of South Korea and America in their attempts to negotiate with North Korea? Well, this is another important but difficult question, where basically I am an economist. I'm not an international politics. I am not a political scientist. So that kind of question is headache to me. But if I say my personal view, that of course dictatorship will be better for maintain consistency. So it will be better for dictatorship will be better in negotiating with North Korea, because in North Korea they have dictator. Our current leader Kim Jong-un is going to be in his position maybe for 40 or 50 years from now on. However, in the South Korean case, every 5 years we have different presidents. Also in the US, they have new one every 4 years. So North Korea is in a better position in negotiating. So if we could have dictatorship, then that is better for negotiating with North Korea. However, negotiation with North Korea is not the only task. I mean, there are many areas of in the nation. So even if dictatorship is better in negotiating with North Korea, I prefer democracy. Another comment is that, does ROK have a strategy for dealing with the nuclear arsenal in DPRK? In case of unification, is there a chance for a unified Korea to maintain a nuclear program? I don't think so. Because whole nations in the world, we are heading for nuclear-free world. Okay, so even if we have unification and North Korea has nuclear capabilities, however, after unification, we have to, I believe, unified Korea has to give up any nuclear capabilities. Okay. Some believe that Japan, China, and US better off without unification of the two Koreas. Is this true? Well, I don't know. frankly. I mean, it is very likely that China, Japan, and US, I mean, well, what I want to say is this. 저 위에 거 다시 보여주세요, 기령. 저 위에 거. 예. I think that China, Japan, US would not support Korean reunification, as we already discussed. However, once Korean unification happens, they will be better off. Well, I'm not sure. Well, I am not ready to answer this question. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me skip this one. Well, next question is that, what do you think about the US so-called sincere position regarding the unification? Locally, it will lead to the withdrawal of US military troops from South Korea and loss of one of the main bases in Asia. It seems that US is not strongly interested in the unification process at all. Well, frankly, I agree with you. Well, that's why, as we had already discussed, 4 major ones surrounding the Korean Peninsula, US, Japan, China, Russia, it is very likely that they don't like Korean unification. For US, that is true. Their US major concern is to prevent Chinese expansion. So once Korea is unified, then, as you already mentioned, North Korea, I mean, America, US, maybe withdraw their troops in South Korea. So that is not good for US foreign strategy. So, well, in the sense, I agree with you. Well, I think there is one last question. With the economic differences between North and South Korea, with the unification, would South Korea willing to carry financial burden to elevate the status of North Korea? Well, that is a very important question, where many Korean people, especially younger generations of South Korea, are scared of unification because of so-called unification cost. Okay, once we have unification on this Korean Peninsula, then we have to enhance people's living standard of North Korea, well, northern part, to the one of the South Koreans. Then we need huge amount of money, of course. So we have financial burden. So are we willing, or are we able? There are 2 questions. If I say the second question first, then I think South Korean government or South Korean economy is going to be fully, we can afford Korean unification. We are strong enough economically. However, are we willing? It depends on the generations. Older generations, they prefer unification, no matter how much does it cost. However, younger generations, they don't like to pay money. So it depends on the generations. However, on average, unification benefits, as I shown in the beginning of my lecture, as a German enjoy the benefits of unification, like that, Korea is going to enjoy the benefits of unification, of course. So no matter how much unification costs, I believe the benefits are much greater than the costs. Well, I think that is all. 그럼 이걸로 끝내도 되는 건가요? Well, if you have any further questions, well, thank you for your attending, and I hope my lecture is help your understanding about Korea and Korean unification. And I hope your study in Korea is going to be well and good wells, and bye. Thank you.